One. This week on The Big Show, after a 1-year delay, the 24th film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Black Widow, is out in theaters and streaming. Also, the final episode of Loki drops later this week, completing its first season. And we also have the What If trailer, which is the next series in the Disney Plus universe that's dropping. We have a panel of film critics, past and present, that will discuss these issues, including Brandon Phibbs, Julian Lytle, my ride and die co-host Charles Kirkland Jr., and I am Tim Gordon. All that and more will be on episode 462 of Keeping It Real with FilmGordon. Let's go. All right, and welcome to the latest episode of Keeping It Real with FilmGordon. I am Tim Gordon. Man, it's amazing what a man can do with 10 minutes in his day. Amazing what can happen. We went from having no guests to 2 guests, just like that. Oh my God. So today, man, first of all, you heard the tease. I'm usually in a bouncy mood, but I am in a much bouncier mood because I am joined today by a guy who is no stranger to our show. We haven't had you on now, what, Brandon, 6 years, 7 years? It's been a minute.
Yeah.
Brandon Phibbs joins us today, coming straight out of Portland. We'll talk about Brandon's journey, or maybe we won't, because it's like I can't really share all of Brandon's journey, but Brandon's my dude. Oh, by the way, everybody, that's White Lightning. That's the nickname I gave him, and we still got that one.
10 years ago or more, yeah.
Big time. Julian Lytle also answered the call today. Welcome back to the show, my brother.
Thanks for having me. Hopefully I'm useful this episode.
And of course, Wilson Morales will not be with us today because he chose to go to a birthday party over talking movies with us. Who knew? Charles Kirkland Jr., welcome back, brother. How you doing?
I could be at a birthday party too.
Yeah, but you were forbidden. You made the mistake of, instead of calling off, you asked, could you call off? So we told you no. Wilson didn't ask, he just called off. All right, man. So we got a busy week of film stuff to talk about. Black Widow's in theaters. I had a chance to see Black Widow about a week and a half ago. Watched it again last night at a friend's home theater. Matter of fact, a friend, Ivan Walks. Ivan's theater. Watched it last night over there. And I have thoughts, but again, before we get to my thoughts, I'm going to start off with Charles Kirkland because for some reason, every time we do these podcasts, Charles gets talked over, and Charles is not really assertive to jump in with both fists and fight his way into the conversation. Charles, what did you think about Black Widow?
Wow, I thank you for letting me go first in this, but I'll just be the one to say that I wasn't a big fan of Black Widow. It seems to me, when you know that the person has got to survive the movie, it kind of takes away a little bit from what the movie is or the expectations of what can happen in a movie. So there was no investment in the movie emotionally for me because I knew Natasha's going to survive at the end because she's got to go on and do bigger and better things. So having said that, it was Marvel seems to have a problem with doing female superheroes, and I think there was just something that was missing from this performance for me. It was decent. I mean, the action is there, the choreography is there, but I will say this: the Taskmaster is one of my favorite villains in the whole Marvel Comics universe. And the things that they did with the Taskmaster in this movie is just blasphemous to me. And I was just not very happy at all with that part of the storyline either. So for me, it was a good movie if you don't go in with any preconceived notions or ideas or even knowledge about the MCU universe. You take it for what it is. It's a good action thriller. It has a decent storyline. It's a Marvel movie, so I don't even know why we're talking about it because people are going to go see it no matter what we say anyway. So I gave it a B-, C+.
Well, we're talking about it from the standpoint that it's current and it's what's out in theaters right now. And again, I don't think people watch our show. Well, I guess they do watch the show to find out what we think about stuff. But, I tell people all the time at the end of every show, we recommend, the stuff you should be watching. And a lot of times we trash a lot of these movies, as you know. And Brandon, I know you didn't get a chance to see it yet, but I know you've seen a lot of the films that are in the MCU. From talking to some of your friends and the stuff that you're reading online, what sense are you getting about the reception of Black Widow? Is everybody sort of enthused by it? Are people like sort of like Charles and kind of like, Marvel's doing what they're doing? Or bucket C for you, are people just basically saying, I'll just wait and find out what's happening with Loki on Wednesday?
No, I think almost, other than I think one person in my community who did like it, but didn't gush about it, everyone's been exactly like Charles. It's pretty much been a disappointing sort of meh fest. I know for myself, I do want to see it, but I'm not going to see it, honestly, for pretty much any other reason than Florence, because she's one of those crushes for me. And I hear that the one consistent thing I've been hearing from everybody is that she is the MVP of the film and the charming star that even kind of beats out Scarlett, and which sounds about right to me. So I know that's why I'm going to be seeing it.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's why we put White Lightning on the air. That perspective right there. Florence is my crush.
The crush on young English.
That's my crush. Julian Lytle. Okay, now, Julian, I preface this by saying for the audience, Julian has history, whether it's good or bad, he has history with Marvel and their franchises. So I'm very interested to find out what you think about this movie.
I wanted you to skip me because I didn't get an invite to see this movie.
Oh, you didn't see it either. All right. So what do you?
I didn't pay. I'm not paying $30 for Black Widow. Like, from my community, from what my social media tells me, the comic book community is going to the theater. All I saw was check-ins in the theater. I'm like, oh, okay, like, oh, this is actually what's going to save the movie theater industry, not my beloved Fast and Furious. So much people I saw taking pictures in the seats, watching Black Widow. Like, it doesn't matter if they like it or what may or not. Like, the amount of money I think I see people spent on Black Widow means it's going to be a success. Like, from theaters or people watching it as soon as they hit the premiere access, I'm sitting there like, oh, there's nobody's waiting. Like, I'll watch it once it's out of the $30 window. When it's on regular Disney Plus, I'll check it out. But nah, I think even if people are like, man, everybody loves Florence Pugh because clearly she's going to be the new Black Widow. I don't need to see the movie to understand what's going to happen. I read comic books for 30 years. I know what's going to happen. Clearly people like David Harbour as Red Guardian, and they like Rachel Weisz as older Black Widow. Yeah, like it's one of the it's like Doctor Strange is what I feels like. People's like, but now people love Doctor Strange, right? Like, people love Ant-Man. It didn't matter that the people were like, oh, the movie was just okay. People love those movies now, or they love the characters, and that's what matters most.
If there's a such thing as a critic-proof movie, it's an MCU movie.
That is correct.
And it's good. That leads me to my point. And good job, Brandon. I was going to say, I have 2 points about this film, right? I think my initial impression, because I sat there in a room with a bunch of other critics, and all of us to a person walked out the theater and had this really strange look on our face, like, that was odd. Because to Charles's point, I think the 1-year delay really did some damage to this film, right? Because we know that when you watch the end scene, which we won't tell you about, that had to be rewritten because, for lack of a better term, there was an introduction that should have happened in this movie back in 2020 that didn't happen, which got addressed and later on in a Disney Plus series, right? So that's number one. But the director that they chose, I think her name was
Kate Shortland.
Kate Shortland. Kate Shortland directed this film, and the action in it started off to me feeling like what they were going after was sort of a Captain America Winter Soldier vibe, and then it kind of twisted into something else. So it was a very odd film, and the fact that they did the origin story of Black Widow after Black Widow perishes in Endgame. sort of was a very interesting. Is that me? Who is that? I'm looking around. That's not me. Somebody vibrating? All right, cool. It just felt very odd. And when I watched it the second time, after getting over that oddness, it plays like a regular film in the MCU. But the difference is, and to both Brandon and Julian's point, when you talk about these films being critic proof, the MCU to me, when I look at all 24 of these films, to me, and I've said this publicly and on this show, privately as well as publicly, is that it's like a big quilt, right? And that every story kind of is stitched together. So even a film like Thor or Dark World, which I thought are probably two of the weakest films, along with Iron Man 3, which I didn't like too much at all. When you put them together in this huge quilt and they're all a part of this universe, you can always extrapolate something out of them that will be something that will work for you, whether they introduce a character, whether there's, back in phase 1 and 2, some Infinity Stone reveal. There's something in it that I think moves the story along. And I think Black Widow is the type of film that is not universally loved as Captain Marvel wasn't either. But I think over time, you see them advancing the story. So you're right, Brandon and Julian, that no matter what we say, people are going to go see these films, but all of them aren't great. I mean, let's be honest about that. All these films in the MCU aren't all home runs. There have been a couple that have just been singles that have just not been.
There's a lot of base hits. I don't know what you're talking about. There's a lot of first basers, a couple second base, maybe 1 or 2 third base. They got maybe like 2 home runs in Julian's opinion. 2 out of 24 episodes.
Just 2?
Yeah. Well, hold on.
I'm not the best guy to be talking to about the boss logo. So it's like, hey,
there you go. And that's what I was trying to get across. So Brandon, how do you think over the first 23 films that you've had an opportunity to see, how do you think Marvel is doing? I mean, are we 500? Are half of them good? More than half? 75%? What are you thinking?
Oh, I would say 75% of them are good. Less than half of them are great. I mean, there's only so many great ones. I was watching Ragnarok last night because I was inspired to do it after watching Loki, because I have a sneaking suspicion there'll be a certain character who will be coming back into the final episode. But I was struck by the fact that my favorite Marvel movies are the 2 movies that don't take themselves seriously. That's Ragnarok and Guardians of the Galaxy, the first Guardians of the Galaxy. Those are far and away my favorite ones, but they're not the most serious ones. But I also think that, like, Winter Soldier, for me, of the serious Marvel movies, Winter Soldier was the very best one. Endgame was obviously great. Most of them work. I agree with you in terms of, and I really wanted, especially given our writer director on that one, I really wanted Iron Man 3 to be good, and it was not good at all. And you pretty much named the bad ones. What I will say is this, is that what constantly strikes me is that even when you have movies, and it sounds like what you're saying is that some of these movies are connective tissue between, like, the greater movies. Like, okay, I got to get from here to here. So what I'm going to do is have this movie here, and I'm going to lock those 2 places. And that little sewing bit right there between those 2 pieces of the quilt, not so good. But it's necessary, it's needed, and it's overall, it works in the overall quilt. And for me, the thing that is shocking is the level and depth of interconnectedness of all of these stories, of the things that are set up over here in Iron Man 2 or something like that you forget about, and 15 years later it comes back and you're like, oh, they paid that off, and oh my God, that kind of stuff that Marvel has been doing from day one boggles my mind. And it happens even in the bad movies. So no, are they all great? No. Are they all terrible? No. I would only say there's a couple of terrible ones. Most of them are just kind of meh. But enjoyable, man.
I got you. And Charles, what about you, man? What are you thinking over these first 24 films? 50%, 75%, 25%? Julian sounds like the 25% guy.
10.
I was going to say
10. But also, Brandon sounds like a person that's been reading comic books for the last 20 years.
No.
Everything he said.
Brandon is a person who has never read
comics. I know, but you sound like people who read comic books, because it's how people sound. Like, oh, that issue wasn't good. That arc wasn't good.
Right.
Oh, but they paid off that thing I read way back in 2002
Mhm.
and like 2016. Like, oh, okay, good. I've been looking for that. Finally.
Okay, I got you, Charles.
I think I'm of the same opinion as everyone else. Well, except for maybe Julian, that I'd say 75-80% are decent movies. I would say maybe 6 home runs out of the 24 for me, but none of them, except for the ones that you mentioned, are truly bad. There are some that are bad. And when we get back to Black Widow, this movie, I mean, you're looking for interconnectedness with the Marvel universe. The threads are pretty thin on this one. So if whenever you get a chance to see it, you'll see that there may be one, maybe 2 little strings here, but it's just like there are in other movies. They're little pearls that pay off maybe somewhere down the line. But this one is a real stretch. If it wasn't for the end credit scene, I mean,
you just took the words right out of my mouth. That's what I was gonna say. It feels like they made the whole movie to give you one piece of information that you don't get to the end scene. Like all that stuff we watched, I was like,
okay, whatever. And they literally put the end credit scene at the very end, after all the credits have run, not mid credits anywhere, at the very, very end of the movie. You got to sit through it all to see where the payoff may be. And it was just a little bit annoying, but that's what they're doing there.
Would you have felt differently if it was a year ago? Just out of curiosity.
Well, a year ago, I think personally for me, I think the story would have been a little more relevant because you still Endgame screened when? I'm trying to remember. Endgame, was that a 2019, 2020? It was 2019, right?
2019.
Okay, so
like spring, like May or like late April.
Now, was the original Black Widow release supposed to be May of 20?
May 3rd of 2020.
Okay, so if it would have come out in its original time, it would have been, I think, probably a little more nostalgia because people were probably a little more tuned in because of Endgame having been, well, so there would have still been some Endgame hangover. And then there's some lines in there that kind of reference some other folks, which I think would have played much better 13 months ago, right? Also, the end scene feels like in this movie, it would have worked a little better because there would have been new information we would have gotten that would have been ahead of the Disney Plus shows, which I think would have kind of connected better. This time, it just felt like an outlier. It just felt odd to me. Like, does it play as an MCU film? Sure, it does. Does it help advance the story at all, other than the most obvious part about who the next Black Widow is going to be? Not really. The end scene sort of gives it some panache, and you go, oh. So when I walked out the theater, I went, oh, that's what the movie was about. That little scene at the end, not anything else that happened that I watched for 2 hours. So it was a and I got a Marvel like walking around the house making faces at me as we're saying this. I'm saying for me, and the other thing, my disadvantage, and all of the comic nerds tell me all the time, I never read the comic books. So everything I know about these characters, I've learned from watching these MCU movies and from watching Disney Plus. Then you just talk to people. You talk to Julian, you talk to Travis Hobson, who's another huge MCU guy. You talk to Charles Kirkland. I didn't read the comic books. Had I known 30 or 40 years ago that all of this was going to happen, maybe I'd have paid more attention and read Marvel comics back in the day, but I didn't. So that's why I said my opinion is strictly as a critic, watching these movies, trying to piece it together and figure it out. And like to Brandon's point, all of them ain't great. A lot of them are good. There's like a couple that I really love. Like Winter Soldier is at the top of the food chain for me, right? As a film. Black Panther was another one for obvious reasons, right? Not just because I'm Black, but I'm saying from the standpoint for them introducing this character, the art, and how they told the story. I thought they did an amazing job with that. Thor Ragnarok, really like that one a lot. The first Guardians, Brandon has hit the nail on the head. That one is really good. I love the tone of that. Now, when you go back and watch Iron Man, which is the kickoff film in the MCU, it's not a bad film. I think it's perfectly spoofed in what we're going to talk about a little later on, the What If trailer. Has everybody gotten a chance to see the new What If trailer? That opening scene where the animated Tony Stark is there and the missile comes in from Stark Industries, and all of a sudden Killmonger picks it up. I go, yeah, you got me right there. I can just shut this off because I think this is going to be a lot of fun to watch all these different what if pieces. So we're going to pivot for a second. I'll start with Julian, who we know is the guy that has to be impressed the most. And you can tell from looking at Julian's face, this is going to be a lot of fun right here. Julian, what was your initial reaction to the What If trailer or the second What If trailer?
It was all right. Like, I wish it was a little bit more creative with what they showed, because now it just seems like, hey, like, what if this movie went differently if we had this character in it versus like something drastically different, and like you have animation and you could do something crazy. So like
give me an example of what you think, which would have been a very creative use in a What If story.
So if you read, like, well, you guys have it, but like in the old comic series, it would be something like, what if X character died and the entire universe would go a different way? So it wouldn't be like, what if Killmonger saved Tony? It would have been like, what if Tony Stark died and never became Iron Man? How does that change the entire thing? Or the interesting part of the trailer is like Peggy being Captain Britain, essentially. Like, I'm like, that's interesting, because that's like a what if comic. Like, what if it wasn't Steve Rogers? What if it was the most actual the best candidate in the room to get the super soldier serum to become the super soldier? That looks interesting. The T'Challa is in Guardians of the Galaxy. I'm like, okay. Okay, have fun. And then they had to show some Marvel Zombies, which I'm like, you're only doing that for the fans of the comic book to hype this show up so it'll get more people to watch it. I'm too cynical with it. I know what y'all doing. I'm not gonna get a what if Conan was in the modern era fighting Wolverine? I'm like, yeah, that was crazy. What if Craven actually killed Peter Parker and became Spider-Man? That was, you reading this book like, this is crazy. What if the X-Men lost Inferno and they all died? They'd be like, oh man, this is bad. Like, like stuff, it just seems like the stakes ain't high.
To be clear, for those of us who have not read the comics, Julian, are there comics that deal with this sort of what if scenario world in which everything is?
It was a comic series called What If.
Okay.
This is based off of that seminal 80s series. Because that is a very Marvel thing, is it's the difference between Marvel and DC in terms of the idea of a multiverse. Marvel is a what if, and it's a different timeline type of thing. Whereas DC is literally like, it's a whole other earth and it's completely, utterly different. Like, it could be same, but also different. So yeah, it's literally based. The animation looked cool. It looked cool enough, but I'm a stickler on animation too. So I'm like, it's hard to impress me. I watch anime, I watch Chinese films, I watch this. I just want a little bit more. But
Brandon, that's why we let Julian go first, because I knew if you asked the question.
Bang, bang.
Go ahead, Brandon. What about you, man?
Oh no, I didn't know about that. I am curious if how long this has been in production. And I'm curious, I mean, there's this weird bifurcation, as we all know, between Spider-Man, about the world between how MCU and Sony deal with it, and creations and distributions and all these sorts of things. And I am wondering if What If was already in the planning stages before Spider-Verse, because for me, it looks like this is a response to that. Like, everyone watched Spider-Verse and went, oh my God, my brain is melting with the awesomeness of this animated film, except Julian, how predictably. and I almost feel like What If was like, hey, we need to have our version of this as well. And so we're going to spin all this stuff, and we're even going to do this like really sort of heightened neon animation style and stuff like that, because we have to have like our own sort of like, version of this. And I'm not saying that in a bad way. I would have done the same thing if I was Kevin. But that's kind of my feeling.
Well, Stan Lee had an interview way back in the day where somebody said, well, could the Hulk ever beat Spider-Man, or could Spider-Man ever beat the Hulk? And Stan Lee was like, look, you guys got to really stop asking these questions, because it all comes down to what the writer wants. The writer can make Spider-Man beat anybody, Deadpool beat anybody, the Hulk beat anybody. It's all about the storyline, and that's where What If goes. What if we had changed the storyline? What if they had gone in a different direction? And so in the comics, these were drastic things that happened, drastic differences. What if the X-Men died on their first mission? What all these kind of things that they come up with, and the what if the trailer for What If just gave me the impression that it was just like a throwaway. It's really just a throwaway to me. It doesn't have any significance, any relevance. It doesn't even impress me very much. So I'm not excited for What If at all. At all.
Well, let me ask you a question, okay? Because again, Brandon and I are in one boat where neither of us read the comics. You guys are guys who obviously have, right? So when I see the opening sequence, when I see Killmonger save Tony Stark, I'm assuming, how does he become Iron Man? Because if the missile doesn't blow up, put shrapnel into his chest, and then he has to go and improvise and try to figure out how to survive, doesn't that sort of even mark that they're going to change the storyline of Iron Man a little bit? I mean, I
would think so, because I've already seen like a little toy thing. So he's still going to be, it's just going to be a different way of him becoming Iron Man. But in terms of like what Charles is saying and what I was saying, the stakes is different. So like a good what if for me is, what if T'Chaka didn't leave Killmonger in Oakland when he did what he did? What if he would have took him home? Would Killmonger have been Black Panther? That's a what if. That's a classic what if story. Going by what they set up in the movie continuity, that's a classic what if story. And to what Brandon was saying, like animation style, I completely agree. Into what you're saying, like they saw that movie, it won an Oscar, everyone loved it. Let's do a CG animated series. Let's heighten the saturation. Let's heighten the colors. Let's do some interesting angles. Let's have some fun with it. But, you know, I'm also coming from, like, I know what they're picking from. So even Spider-Verse was a comic story that Sony was like, this would be a good idea to bring Miles into the mainstream if you disassociate, let's say, them using him in the cartoons on Disney XD and Disney Channel or whatever the Sony team is doing in the PlayStation area of Sony media. Like the Spider-Verse was a really good idea to pick that name from the comics and do something else. So again, it was people's similar idea. It's like, okay, we're going to do this what if thing, and that was successful. Yeah, let's do something like that. Like I agree, but in the end, it's all Kevin Feige and his team just like looking at what they got in the library and saying, that stuff, giving some assistant a job to read a bunch of stuff, to talk to a bunch of writers, and they coming up with whatever they come up with.
Wow.
They got new properties.
So Brandon, it seems like we are split 50-50 on this one. You know, the folks who are true comic book readers and comic nerds are like,
cynical. We cynical. That's all.
They're very cynical. Me and you are like,
Well, yeah, but it all goes back to, like, if you are invested in a source material. So I am not a Marvel nerd. This is not a world this is a world I enjoy, but it's not a world that I've spent any amount of like time in the source material with. But as you very well know, Tim, I do have a nerddom. It's all on this like shelf behind me over here. And that is Star Trek. That is my obsession. I've read hundreds of books. I go to the conventions. That's my world. Mm-hmm. And so when you do have something like even say Star Trek Discovery and like new Trek that has been coming out, that seems to flaunt its ability to always violate the very sort of core ideals and stuff like that of the original shows. You have people like me who react by vomiting lava in a lot of anger and saying you're bullshit Can we cuss on this show? Like, this
No.
is fundamentally violating the tenets of the source material on which you claim to be based. And if you want to make this show, fine, give it a different name and don't pretend you're part of this universe, because you're not adhering to the rules, the tone, the spirit, the foundation of this world. And so I understand why people, even in Marvel, would have that reaction. I don't have that reaction simply because I don't know that original source material. And if I did, then maybe I would be speaking a lot more like Julian. But I don't. As with you, Tim, my entire version, my entire experience of this world is completely the C in MCU. And because of that, I react differently.
I think what we're looking to, and Brandon gives a good example, is that a lot of times when you have stuff that's adapted like this, the source material is always so much stronger than what you get on the screen. And I mean, you hear it from people who've read books, and then their books get translated into movies and say, oh, the book was so much better. So, I mean, there's always this aspect of trying to communicate the themes that were in the source material appropriately for in a film. And sometimes they hit, sometimes they miss. And this is one of those times when, as knowing the source material, I know how they've missed on this. And where someone who hasn't seen the source material, read the source material, accepts it for what it is. And that's one of the things about Black Widow. If you don't know anything about the Marvel Comics universe and who Taskmaster is and all that stuff, all Red Guardian and all that goes behind the scenes in this story, you come out of Black Widow just fine. But when you have all that history, when you have all that knowledge, it means different things to you when you see it on screen.
Isn't it funny, like, as a film guy with degrees in English literature and that sort of thing, like I am of two worlds. I can come to this in two worlds. And I frequently say, like, you shouldn't necessarily, when you're making a film, when you're making an adaptation, it's an adaptation, it's its own thing. And you cannot be slavish to the original source material. You are going to have to adapt it in very interesting and sometimes creative and sometimes ways that will piss off people, because you just can't copy and paste to the screen. And when you come close to doing that, you get something like the original Harry Potter film, which is just kind of meh. It doesn't really get good until they say, you know what, we're going to have to kind of create our own world based on this material. And I say that about like everything, every sort of like literary source. But I understand but I think it's different with something like Marvel, in which you're not just, it's not just an original book or a couple of books. It is a cornucopia of decades worth of source material that if you're violating that, you're violating not something that's like an inch deep. You're violating something that's like 1,000 feet deep. And there's a lot more people to piss off and a lot more wrong to do based on you're wronging that source material, in a way that's like a greater violation.
Well, for me, I guess, so I'm open to any type of adaptation. Like it's superhero comics. So like I might not be as a huge of a fan of Star Trek as you are, Brandon. Like I'm not into the reading of the books, right? But I have other friends, like a mutual friend of me and Tim's, Ulysses, who's met actors, who got props. He knows it all. So like I just watch the shows, but I do know this: the way in which Star Trek is made is very, for the most part, linear in terms of its timeline and how it kind of branches off into, let's say, the Mirrorverse and other things like that. So when you do a discovery and you start doing things that are not like the core tenets, you're going to have pushback. With Marvel or any of the two main superhero things, Marvel or DC, they've been adapted so many times, even within the books, because Marvel is a soft reboot company. So they'll change continuity, and when things happen slowly over time, oh no, Tony Stark, all that happened right around the beginning of Vietnam, then around in 2004, it happened in Afghanistan. It's like things change because they know eventually we're going to make this movie. So, and do you watch all the cartoons? You might play a video game. You get used to having, I like X version of a character versus this. So to me, I'm just going off the trailer. I don't know if it's good or bad, but the trailer ain't the main thing that's going to get me to push the play button yet. If I hear somebody tell me, yo, like this episode was popping, this episode was popping, this episode was good, then I'll check it out. Like Loki, the first 2 episodes, I was surprised. It's a little different. I liked it. I done read 87 bazillion versions of Loki. So you give me something different, it's good, I'll give it a shot.
Well, and again, I was going to say that's a great segue to the last thing I wanted to talk about, which was Loki, which is the third series in the Disney Plus. These characters, we've had WandaVision, Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and now Loki. And it's interesting to me when I talk to people about these series. I remember for WandaVision early this year, they sent out screeners to all of the press. And they sent the first 3 episodes of WandaVision. And I swear to you, the first 2, I was sitting here going, what the hell am I watching? What is going on? Why am I watching all these? Why am I seeing the Dick Van Dyke Show? And why am I seeing Brady Bunch sets? And it didn't register until like halfway through the 3rd episode. And I went, oh, I see what they're trying to do. So creatively, I thought that one worked really, really well, even though I thought the ending felt rushed because it felt like it was missing an episode. Like there was an episode between the penultimate episode and the last episode. Something else should have been in there. At least that's my feeling. Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which really felt like watching like a version of Winter Soldier. That one really worked well for me. And I loved how they introduced certain characters and brought people back. And to me, I like that one a lot. And then we get to Loki, which felt like a kooky kind of MCU X-Files sort of a deal with Owen Wilson, of course, Tom Hiddleston. I like this one a lot. But the thing is, of the 3 of these shows that have been on so far, this one, I think I actually have to go to multiple sites to kind of have stuff explained because I'm like, what the hell am I? Like, I don't understand any of these Easter eggs because I've never read the comic book. So when people start talking about the timekeepers and this latest episode where, he's in the void and you're seeing all these different iterations of different Lokis dressed up as different beings, ethnicities. So it's the show that I feel that they've made that I have the most homework with, that I have to study hard after every episode and like, oh, okay, I understand what I'm watching because what was that?
But you like doing homework, right?
But it makes you do homework in a way. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Charles, we'll start with you on this because Brandon and because I know Brandon is really loving Loki. Charles, you never know. I mean, not Charles, but Julian, you never know what you're gonna get on anything. So Charles, you start off, man. What are you feeling about Loki as we're coming up to the wrap up? Because I got a theory from what I've been reading and studying, but my main theory and the reason why I don't think it's possible is because there is a character that could be in this show on Wednesday, but his debut in the movie in the MCU is probably like a year away, in Quantumanium. So I can't see that happening this soon. I could be wrong. What are you thinking?
From episode 1, I told you what was coming in this series, and the thing about it is this series I think was truly made for comic book fans, for the ones who read the books, who know all the stuff, because it is very insider. I mean, there are lots of Easter eggs. I mean, in this last episode, you saw Throg, you saw all kinds of things that have happened in here that you're like, wait a minute, I don't know who that is. But for me, who's read so much, knows so much about the universe.
You just not be inside baseball, and if you introduce a phrase, you got to tell us what are you talking about?
Okay, so we saw the alligator Loki, right? There's a frog Thor. That's all that was in the.
You call him Throg?
And his name was Throg. Yes,
you saw him in there. He was in there.
And I saw Throg. You see him in the last episode. So it's if you don't know what you're looking at, you're like, what was that? Or you might have even missed it. So for those of us who are like comic book geeks, this is heaven for me. I'm enjoying this series immensely. It's not high on the action like Falcon and the Winter Soldier. It's not revelatory like Wanda and Vision and whatever. But It is very entertaining. It is very enlightening, and I'm loving the way that they're getting to this point of introducing this character that we heard was coming, and we're kind of. I'm like,
Are we
why are
talking
they
about the
doing
same
it?
character?
Yeah, I'm sure. I've told you who it was.
Why are you guys talking around the character?
They won't introduce
Okay.
that character this early, I don't think.
It's Kang. It's always Kang.
Kang.
It's been Kang from the
But
beginning.
how you gonna introduce Kang when Kang's not supposed to debut until 2023?
Tim, they had his face behind the timekeepers
I
in the
told him that.
trailer last
said-
year. I was like, oh, that's Kang because they casted a black dude to be Kang. I'm like,
I
It's
said
Kang.
if you go through the end credit scenes, that the last face they show you is Jonathan Major's face as Kang.
Kang the Conqueror. Like,
I was like, yes, this has all been about Kang from the beginning.
Brandon, are you feeling this,
Renslayer is Kang's love in the comic book. So when they said Renslayer, I was like, oh, I know who that is. I mean, it's all been stuff for us geeks who love this stuff. So that's why if you go on social media, every comic book geek is like, yeah, this is the show. This is the best one that they've done because it speaks to us who know what we're looking at. And
Okay,
so
stop. Let me
for those of
ask-
you who
before-
don't,
before
who
I
have
get
to go
Brandon.
back and do your homework, I think it's genius because it is making you go do your homework to figure out what is going on in this show.
Okay, well, hold on a second. So this brings up to me what I think is a very interesting point, right? So there are movies that are made for folks who are not the comic book folks, like the regular MCU films, and then there's series like this, right? And no, I'm not trying to say this to be mean, but like, what is the purpose in general audience Disney Plus of making a series that like 95% of people who've never read the comics will get none of the references? Like, we don't understand. Like, if I didn't read or have friends, I would be totally lost watching Loki.
that's what
None of
Amazon
it
is
made
for.
any sense to me.
That's what Amazon is for.
That's what Amazon.
They,
That's
they
what
own the books. Like, they own the
I mean, this is an exhibition of power. This is Marvel saying, "Oh, we got you. We got you. You're gonna watch this because we can, and so you're gonna have to find out about us."
But Tim, that's
all it is.
That's my point. Like you're doing the homework. You're enjoying doing the homework, as am I. Loki is the high point of the Disney Plus series. It's not only that, it's probably my favorite television series that I've watched live since like the opening of Game of Thrones. It is so good. I look forward to it every week with like jittery anticipation. It is so good. And you're right. Big sweeping story I get. All those little in-jokes and Easter eggs, I don't get any of them until I go back and I read about them. And I can't wait at the end of the episode to go read about them. So unlike Charles, who sees things he knows, I see things that are clearly meant to be something. Thanos copter, what the heck's that?
Right.
That's awesome. I love doing that kind of stuff afterwards.
Right.
So I don't know it, but I love going to figure it out because I love doing that homework. So it is working both for the Charleses and for the Brandons.
So I have a question. So, okay, since because I was thrown off because I was like, hey, it can't be Kang. They can't introduce Kang this early because it's like he's not going to show up for 2 years in Ant-Man 3, right?
We just got done talking about Black Widow happening like so long after, but whatever.
But
Tim, they showed Thanos at the end of Avengers in 2012.
Sure.
He ain't coming to a movie until
that is
2018.
true. So I have a question for the two insiders, right? Julian and Charles. So the fact when Sylvie, if you've been watching Loki, you're totally in on the show. So when Sylvie asked, her name is Ravonna
Renslayer, yeah.
Yes. So when he asked Ravonna, tell me who's behind this at the point of a blade, she said, I don't know. I want to know as bad as you. So what you're telling me is in episode 6, we're gonna find out that she's in it all like as in WandaVision. It was her all along. She knew exactly what was going on because this is your guy, Kang, that will show up. So the reason why I'm saying that that's too obvious is because everybody knows that. So what would be the fun if that's how it ended on Wednesday? What would be the fun?
It doesn't. Well, see, you don't know, so you don't know what they could possibly go to, right? So like me and Charles know that Kang has a foe that is himself, but old. So they can they can go a whole.
Brandon, look that up while we're on.
So like,
I confess, I don't know who Kang is at all.
Yeah,
I've
so
seen
like
chatter about it. So I'm even less understanding this than even you are, Tim. So,
but
well,
Brandon,
Jonathan Majors has been cast as Kang, who is supposed to be the adversary in Ant-Man 3, but there's a tie that they've been teasing people all along through these first 5 episodes that is Kang. And I was saying to myself, knowing Marvel the way I do, that Marvel isn't about the obvious, right? You know, like we talked earlier about there's things that they put out, and you might not get resolution for years. Like I remember seeing Red Skull in Captain America First Avenger. He disappears. And then in Endgame, he shows up guarding the Soul Stone. I was sitting in the theater going, damn, that's real. I forgot all about that. Dang, that happened years earlier. So for me, you're right. There is the possibility that you can introduce Kang now, and then Kang disappears, and we know we're aware of him in the MCU. And when he shows up 2 years later in Quantumanium, it will make sense because we met him here. Or it could be something, as Julian said, it could be something else that's that obvious that we'll throw you off a little bit by introducing something else that comic insiders don't know. Me and Brandon will have to go and kind of do the research and figure it out. But go ahead, Julian.
This show is the most sci-fi of them all and the most Doctor Who-ish of them all. And if you understand anything about Doctor Who can meet Doctor Who.
Yeah.
So just because we're saying, yo, it's Kang, we ain't telling you
which Kang.
So I wouldn't be surprised if Thor shows up in the next episode. I would definitely not be surprised if everyone's favorite sorcerer shows up, Doctor Strange shows up. Like there's a number of different places it could go. Tim's convinced it's not going to happen.
No. Tim made the mistake one day of looking up on Wikipedia the cast listing, and they've listed all of the people who are going to be on this show. And there are 3 people in the MCU who are going to appear in this last episode because they haven't been in the first 5, and it's listed that they're on the show. So I'm looking for 3 more people, and I don't know how. Now, one of them is really obvious, right? One is really, really obvious, Brandon, if you think about it. I'm not even going to tell you. Just think about Loki. Think about where Loki comes from. There's one really obvious person that will be showing up. And then there are 2 that are not so obvious that I was like, huh. So Charles and Julian, you know who I'm talking about, right?
No, I don't look up the cast list, man.
Okay, well, I looked at. I can put it in the. If you want me to, I can put it in the chat for you.
Well, see, I don't have to do homework, so I didn't go look at any cast lists or anything like that. So I don't need to do that kind of research.
Charles is like, oh yeah, I remember that from this issue of blah 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 of Avengers 352 or something.
Her name? God, man. Oh,
so is it carte blanche? Is it carte blanche?
So what I was going to say though is that there are many iterations of Kang, and we don't know what we're going to see when we get to that castle, and we don't know how it's going to affect, because there are iterations of Kang that will give us the Fantastic Four, that will introduce us into a whole lot of other things. So I mean, there could be a lot of directions. Kang could have a pop-up like Nick Fury in almost every movie between here and that time when he debuts in Quantumania. So it's just, what iteration are you going to get when we get there?
Yeah,
Kang is pretty important.
I put it in the chat. Those 3 people are listed in the credits.
I didn't think of any of those. Oh, really? I didn't.
Well, see, the second one I thought was obvious. The second one is the one that's really obvious. The other 2, I'm like,
well, they have to. One of them, they have to set up a whole nother show along with a movie that you guys just.
Well, the last name
sets up a show.
Is the setup of the current movie, Black Widow. So if you watch Black Widow, there's the setup of that one.
Or the show.
Of the show. So that's why I said sometimes, it's interesting because in our world, when we watch these movies, we know before Disney Plus that Marvel would use these end credit scenes to set up stuff for coming movies. Now you got Marvel movies, MCU movies, setting up the shows And now the show's kicking stuff back to movies. So I mean, like you said, it's very creative. Well, I say it's very creative. Julian kind of poo-poos the whole thing. That I think is very creative what Marvel and their writers have done with these shows. Brandon, you were saying?
I agree. So I had superhero fatigue after Endgame. And I was like, okay, that was a great movie. It wrapped everything up really succinctly and beautiful, like in a way that was really fulfilling and like really satisfying. And then I was like, and I'm done with superheroes. and I just kind of stepped away. And I have to admit, and so I didn't watch Falcon and the Winter Soldier. I didn't watch WandaVision. And then Loki just looked weird enough. And as a massive Doctor Who fan, like I was like, okay, now this is maybe something I'll give a little try to. I loved Loki so much that since Loki began, I went back and watched Winter Soldier and I watched WandaVision. And now I'm suddenly like, bring on more superheroes.
They got you.
What did you think about Falcon and the Winter Soldier?
Falcon and the Winter Soldier was of the three, it's my least favorite. Wow. It was the most paint by numbers. It felt the most like some of the movies. And what I love about both WandaVision and Loki is that they are, like you said it with yourself, with those, like watching those first couple episodes of WandaVision, you're like, what the hell am I watching? It is so creative. They are taking such creative, not liberties, that's the wrong word. They're just taking such creative tact with so many of these things with Loki and with WandaVision that that's why I think my fatigue is gone, because they are doing it in ways that is so different and so kind of weird, but also so wonderful, so blisteringly creative that I'm like, oh, I'm in for this. I'm down for this. And I understand that there's probably not going to be a sequel to either of these two shows.
Right.
Which is fine.
Actually, they've announced a sequel to Loki.
Have they really?
Yeah.
Well, let me just say this about when you talked about WandaVision, Brandon. I think what we found out after the fact is that what made sense is that Doctor Strange was supposed to be a huge part of WandaVision, right? And for whatever reason, Kevin Feige put the kibosh on it, because all those commercials that you saw when you watch WandaVision, you know, where or these voices were all Strange sending her messages, and the payoff was supposed to have been Benedict Cumberbatch showing up in that final episode, and then that would have been the payoff for the show. But when you take Doctor Strange's involvement out, they had to tack on this. I did not like at all the finale of WandaVision. I really didn't. And as months have gone by, I feel even stronger about it. That I thought it was a major
elements.
Yeah, I mean, I just thought like there were things, and maybe it was kind of conversations with Julian or folks who were real comic book nerds. Like there was a lot of stuff in that last episode that just didn't make any sense. It just didn't. And it didn't make sense because when you take the Doctor Strange element out of it, then they had to recreate it by kind of doing different stuff. And it was like, Falcon and the Winter Soldier, I would agree, is probably of all the three of these shows, the most conventional one that was made, right? It's a story which really talks about the racial element of a Black man taking over the Shield. That's essentially what the show is about. It's about some other stuff too, but that's really the driving point. And I would agree that I think out of these three, Loki by far is the one that I've watched probably the most. And I get enjoyment because every time I watch it, I find new stuff. I'm like, wow, I didn't see that the first time. So there's a lot inside of Loki. Loki is really well done. Very, very well done show.
But
Julian, go ahead.
All three series, they're also trying to tackle. You just hinted at it with like a Black man taking up that shield.
Right.
They're dealing with racial issues. They're dealing with what happened after the
blip. The blip.
And then of course with WandaVision, dealing with grief, and Loki dealing with learning to love yourself. Like they are tackling some really great, also like deep sort of psychological things that a movie can't do, that the movie doesn't have time to do, but which a television series does. They're going to have to rename this thing the MCTVU. And I'm starting to, and as our entire world is transitioning away from worshiping films and starting to recognize that the best stuff's all being made on TV now, by the way. I think you might be seeing a lot more of these kinds of things, but I love what they're doing with that. They're really kind of they've shown us big blockbustery type spectacle, and now they're like, hey, we can do spectacle and also go interverse as well, and they're doing an amazing job in all three of those series.
I love that interverse. Wow, you go ahead, Brandon. All right, Julian, we saved the best for last, man. If there's somebody that's gonna throw some cold water on all the love, it's you, bro.
Oh, I thought I said it. I just said everything. It's the most sci-fi and British show out of the bunch. It's all right. It had a good start. It is very in baseball, as Charles was talking, like Thanos copter. I'm like, y'all, what would I expect from a person who used to write for Rick and Morty? Yeah, somebody who would throw the Thanos copter in the episode randomly. But
why would Thanos need a helicopter?
That's longer than what we have to talk about.
Yeah, that's a long story.
There's no need. That's
a long rabbit hole.
This is a different iteration of Thanos, not the one that.
No, not Goonie Thanos.
Remember what we were talking about earlier? Because the writer wrote it that way.
Yeah. Facts.
Okay, we got about 4 minutes left.
It's all right. It's a decent question. Here you go.
Watch this. I just want to ask this one question because when I go back and look at Endgame. Was it Endgame a great movie? Yeah, I liked Endgame a lot. Did Endgame tie up everything? Yeah, it did. I'm still not understanding, and I guess this is a much longer conversation, but I want to start the conversation. It is absolutely, in my estimation, ridiculous that you literally needed every hero in the MCU to fight against Thanos. One guy. When I saw that we have Captain Marvel, there wasn't any one or two individual Avengers that could have taken Thanos out.
No.
Wait a minute. Again, it's all about what's the writer writes. And Thanos had his army. He wasn't alone in that fight. But, I mean, it's all in, because I was also of the impression that there were a number of people who could have taken out Thanos on his own.
Captain Marvel,
Scarlet Witch, Captain Marvel. There were
Scarlet Witch.
There were a number of them that could have done it, and Scarlet Witch almost did if it wasn't for Thanos realizing what he was under. So, I mean, it all comes down to the movement of the story. If it was one of them that could have done it, then we wouldn't have had an Avengers movie. So, I mean, the whole point is to have the movie. So that's what the writers wanted.
Okay, stop.
And they ain't got those characters. They don't got the characters in it that usually take him out. Easily either.
There's no Adam Warlock or anything.
There's no Silver Surfer.
Right.
There you go.
All those guys are missing.
So again, Brandon, inside baseball, I have no idea about
all them. They're not there. So right now,
you know who the Silver Surfer is?
No, but I'm saying I think part of yeah, right. But I'm saying I think part of what the public doesn't understand that real comic guys understand is that we don't know who has what power to do what. So I'm always confused about the powers. Like, I would think Captain Marvel is sort of, yes, I see.
Silver Surfer?
Yes.
You recognize who those faces are?
I do not.
Neil deGrasse Tyson is the Silver Surfer.
And
Carl
Sagan. Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. I like that.
We had to bring Brandon back when is your friend's second or third season of his show dropping?
What show are we talking about?
We talking about what is your guy's name? Seth
MacFarlane?
Yeah,
Orville?
Orville. When is Orville coming back?
I haven't heard the recent thing. I've been chatting with a bunch of the team on it, and they have resumed. They may have even finished production, but they had to shut down in the middle of it because of COVID. And but it's definitely coming back.
I love the Orville. I love
me too. Absolutely.
And there's one particular episode before we get out of here. The one where they go back in time and I think Kelly is her name, saves a girl and they make a god out of her, and all the commentary on that episode. Love that episode.
Yeah, that show is better every season. I'm really looking forward to it. It started off as a comedy show with serious stuff, and now it's like a serious show with comedy stuff. But it's working like gangbusters. But that's
so Julian and Charles, the man who just finished speaking is Brandon Phibbs. Brandon Phibbs told me before we came on the show, I'm not a critic anymore, but you do have a point of view that we know and we love, and you always welcome back. And just remember, next week, man, just be looking out about 10 minutes before the show. You might get an invite. All right. So with that being said, Charles Kirkland, always a solid job. Julian Lytle, Brother, it is always a pleasure having you on. Nobody has your amount of anger ball, as our friend Shireen would call it, and shade like you, bro. I love it when it comes to these Marvel properties. Julian,
I'm petty. I'm petty.
And Brandon Phibbs, White Lightning. It's always a pleasure. As we tell people all the time, please see something good at the movies. You heard what we all had to say about Black Widow. Those who seen it and didn't, you make up your mind on that. Loki. Last episode on Wednesday, will it be Kang? And if it is Kang, which Kang the Conqueror do we get? Inquiring minds want to know. Until next week, man, you guys take care. Enjoy your Saturday, and thank you all for your participation today. You guys take care.